The walls of the small Karachi house echoed with silence that night, the kind of silence that follows disappointment. Aris sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the closed shop keys lying in his palm. His café dream, Café Noor, had lasted exactly 6 months. Every brick, every table, every smile he had hoped to serve with coffee, all gone in debt and rent notices. The front door creaked open. His father's voice broke the silence. Kitni din chail ga ye sapna Aris, har bar ek naya plan or har bar naya nuksan. His tone wasn't angry, it was tired, cold, final. Aris looked up. Main bas ek chance or chata hoon abu. Business galat na hai thaw whacked galat thaw. His father laughed bitterly, a sound that cut deeper than any insult. Whacked galat na hai sok galat hai. Tum real estate kai batin kart ho, jays crore zemin p ped p ugtain. Then came the sentence that would echo in Aris's mind for years. Tum sindagi main kuch na hai milni wala, property, tum, sapni deco cam si cam epni kat ki. His mother stood in the doorway, wringing her dupatta nervously. She wanted to say something, but fear of another argument sealed her lips. Aris looked at her, eyes pleading for 1 ounce of belief, but she turned away. That was the night he decided to leave. He packed a small bag, 2 shirts, 1 photo of his parents, and the old wristwatch his grandfather had given him. As he stepped out, Karachi's warm wind brushed against his face, carrying the smell of rain and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed like destiny calling. He paused at the gate, looking back one last time. The house lights flickered. He whispered under his breath, Agar ok at sapnon si hodi, to dunia ki sabs emir log by kh, wab dek, na ch had dete. The night swallowed his footsteps as he walked away. He didn't know where the road would lead due by struggle or success, but one thing he knew for sure, he would return one day, not for revenge, but for recognition. And when that day came, they would remember this night, the night a broken boy walked out to build his own foundation. The Dubai air was dry, hot, and strangely comforting. Aris stepped out of the airport with a single bag and a heart full of chaos. The city glimmered like a mirage, tall glass towers scraping the clouds, cars humming like a different species altogether. He had come here chasing a dream that his own family had laughed at. For the first few months, life was merciless. Aris shared a cramped room with 4 other men, 2 drivers, a cook, and a security guard. They rotated shifts, slept on the same mattress, and shared stories of survival over cheap instant noodles. The air smelled of sweat and ambition. Every morning, Aris ironed his only formal shirt, walked miles to a small real estate office in Dera, and begged for a job. After weeks of rejection, the firm Al Safar Realty finally hired him, not as an agent, but as an office assistant. He fetched tea, filed papers, printed brochures, the lowest rung in the ladder. Yet each day, while others complained, Aris watched, listened, and learned. He studied how agents talked, how clients thought, how deals were made and lost. At lunch, while others scrolled through phones, he scribbled notes in a worn-out diary titled One Day. At night, in his tiny corner under the flickering fan, Aris watched YouTube videos on property investment, urban design, and finance. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. One evening, his boss, Mr. Hanif, an older Pakistani investor, noticed him staying late in the office. Beta ye overtime ki paise koi na hai diga, he said with a chuckle. Aris looked up shyly. Main paise kili, I no hai rukta sir, seek, nkili I rukta hoon. Something in that answer struck Hanif deeply. He saw in Aris what he himself had been: hungry, desperate, but full of fire. Within weeks, he took Aris under his wing. Under Hanif's mentorship, Aris learned the real craft, not just selling property, but building value. He learned negotiation, timing, and patience. When Hanif handed him his first independent project, a small apartment renovation, Aries worked like a man possessed. He handled everything himself: design, contractors, marketing. The result, the unit sold for double its expected price. For the first time, he felt the sweetness of victory. When the payment arrived in his account, Aries stared at the digits for a long time. Not because of the amount, but because it was proof that his dreams weren't foolish. That night, he called home after years. His mother answered. Her voice trembled when she heard his. Kays ho Aries. He paused. Thikun Ami, Kam Mil Gaya Hai, Thoda Ech Hachal Raha Hai. She smiled softly. Abu Kate Hain, Tumdu, by Mainep Natime Barbud Kar Raho. Aries swallowed hard. Shayed, Lekin Cab Hi Barbud Hone Kili. I by whacked lag to high. He hung up before his father could come to the phone. Then, standing by the window of his shared room, watching the city lights flicker like promises, he whispered, Main Wapas Onga, Lekin Istafa, Serve Sapni Lekar Nahai Epni Junia Lekar. And somewhere between the skyscrapers and the sand, Aries's new identity began to rise, one built not on his father's doubt, but on his own determination. 8 years later, Karachi looked smaller. The same streets where people once mocked his failures now looked like a map of unfinished memories. Aries stepped out of the airport wearing a crisp suit, not designer, but dignified. His eyes were calmer now, sharper, but behind that calm lived a storm that hadn't fully settled. The driver dropped him near the coastline. The sea was rough that evening, and so was the building that stood before him, an old, crumbling colonial structure. Its walls were cracked, the paint peeling, windows shattered, and yet there was something about it, something that whispered hope. Locals called it cursed. Investors called it worthless. Aries called it potential. When he told his friends and former colleagues in Dubai that he was buying this forgotten ruin, they laughed. Are you insane? That place is falling apart. Hotels don't work in Karachi, bro. Go for apartments or plazas. But Aries wasn't looking for logic. He was looking for legacy. Standing in the middle of the decaying hall, with dust dancing in the air and broken chandeliers hanging like forgotten dreams, he whispered to himself, Ya hai si shuru karni hai kahani, jahan sab kotam samaj ra hain. He named the project the Horizon, because for him, the horizon was where the impossible began. 2 years of struggle followed, permits, corruption, bribes, delays, storms, and sleepless nights. There were days when he ran out of funds and hope together, but each morning he stood at the construction site, greeting the workers, sketching new ideas, refusing to let the past repeat itself. He didn't tell his parents, he didn't call home, not yet. He wanted the walls to speak for him when the time came. Slowly, the ghostly ruin began to glow. Local craftsmen restored its arches, marble returned to the floors, and soft golden lights replaced the darkness. Every corner carried a piece of Aries's soul. When the first mock-up room was completed, Aries stood silently in the doorway. The chandelier above shimmered softly, reflecting his tired eyes. It wasn't just a room. It was redemption carved in stone. The opening date was announced. The Horizon, a modern heritage hotel, made headlines. News channels called it a symbol of revival for Karachi's architecture. Investors offered to buy stakes. Aries refused. He hadn't built it to sell, he'd built it to show. One night before the launch, he walked alone through the grand lobby. Everything was perfect: polished floors, jasmine fragrance, and a faint sound of waves outside. He looked up at the ceiling and closed his eyes. Abu Ami Abdekna, Tamhara Beta Ok Hatsi Nahai, Iradan Si Bana Hai. He picked up his phone and drafted an invitation. No name, no explanation, just one line printed in gold. You once said I'd never own real estate. I'd like you to see something tomorrow. He smiled, placed the card in an envelope, and handed it to a courier. Tomorrow would be the day the past met the present, not in anger, but in quiet victory. The evening of the grand opening arrived like a dream wrapped in gold. The horizon glowed under the Karachi sunset, its white pillars bathed in amber light, chandeliers flickering like stars. Guests arrived in luxury cars, their laughter echoing through the marble halls. Cameras flashed, music played softly in the background. Aries stood near the entrance, not in the spotlight, but quietly watching. He had worn a simple black suit, elegant, not loud. His heart, however, was anything but calm. Every tick of the clock brought him closer to the moment he had waited 8 years for. And then they came. His parents stepped out of a car, his mother in a light blue silk shawl, his father leaning slightly on his cane, his eyes sharp as ever. They looked around, astonished by the grandeur. Neither of them knew who had invited them, but curiosity had won. As they entered the lobby, a young hostess greeted them. "Welcome to the horizon, sir, ma'am. Please this way." His mother's eyes widened at the golden arches, the flower arrangements, the warm lights. "Allah kitna khoobsurat hai," she whispered. His father nodded stiffly. "Deco, paisa ho to sab mumkin hai." They didn't know they were standing inside their son's impossible dream. Moments later, the event began. The manager stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight we celebrate not just a new chapter for Karachi's hospitality, but the vision of one man who believed in rebuilding what others abandoned." He turned slightly toward Aries. "Please welcome the owner and founder of the Horizon, Mr. Aries Ahmed." Time stopped. His mother froze mid-step. His father's hand trembled. Their eyes turned toward the stage, where their son, the same boy they had once told Tum, Kuch Nahai Milni Wala, stood beneath the golden lights, smiling humbly. Aries walked up to the microphone, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. "Log Kate Hain Sapni Mange Hot, Hain Par Main Katahun, Nafrat or Shak Us, by Zayada Mange Pat Hain." He looked toward his parents. "Main Aj Surf Ek Hotel, Nahai Kal Rahe, Main Unsab Lafzan Ko, Dafin Kar Rahe Hoon Jo Kate the Tums, Nahai Hoga." The crowd applauded, but all Aries saw were 2 teary faces in the front row. After the ceremony, his parents approached him. His father's eyes were red, his voice softer than Aries had ever heard. "Tumhara Matlab, Ye Sabi Tumhara Hai." Aries nodded. "Ak Beta Ka Sapna Tha or Aj Hakikat Hai." His mother's tears finally broke free. She held his hands tightly, whispering, "Humin Mafkar Du Beta, Humni Tum Samj, Ahai Nahai." Aries smiled gently. "Main Narrows Nahai Tha Ami, Bas Sabit Karna Tha Ki Sapni Ok, at Nahai Dek." They stood there in silence, a family that had once shattered, now mending under the soft glow of chandeliers and forgiveness. Later that night, as the guests left and music faded, Aries stood alone on the hotel terrace. The sea stretched endlessly before him, reflecting the moonlight like melted silver. His parents' laughter echoed faintly from below, a sound he hadn't heard in years. He closed his eyes, feeling the ocean breeze on his face. The world finally felt still. "Forgiveness," he whispered, "is the sweetest revenge." And as the waves kissed the shore beneath his $12 million dream, Aries smiled, not as a man who had proven others wrong, but as a son who had finally proven himself right.